For little over 2 years, Michel Barnier has been the European Commissioner for the Internal Market and Services. Part of that brief is to calm the markets and complete the single European market. Those are two challenges which the current debt crisis has made even more urgent. Euronews talks to him about these challenges. The Commissioner, who's held several ministerial jobs in France, also gives his opinion on the difficult balance between austerity and growth.
Michel Barnier, bienvenue sur Euronews.
Michel Barnier, welcome to Euronews. At the European Commission, you're on the front line to fight against the crisis and its causes. I want to return to that. But first, I'd like to discuss with you the Europeans' frustration at what is seen as the dogma of austerity. We saw this recently in the Netherlands, where the government fell. Do you think it's time to rethink these austerity measures and instead give priority to growth?
Ce qu'on appelle austérité, ce sont des mesures prises.
The austerity measures have been put in place in several countries to reduce their deficits, to lessen the country's debts. It has been made more difficult because for 20 or 30 years some countries have been badly managed, writing blank cheques secured against the future generations and spending more than they earned.
Des chèques en blanc ou des chèques en bois sur les générations.
That's why it is such a difficult situation today. And so action has to be taken quickly, because if these countries, not just Greece, do not make the effort to control, to better manage their finances so they can borrow, they will be forced to borrow at exorbitant rates, or no one will lend to them.
Ils pourront emprunter à des taux exorbitants où plus personne ne leur prêtera.
But there are still countries that are in recession. Unemployment rates are soaring. In Spain, it's nearly 25%. What some countries are asking for is simply to have a little more time to return to below a 3% deficit, because sometimes that objective is not sustainable. But no flexibility is allowed, especially with the treaty budget.
This treaty budget is a joint ownership agreement. It was not decided by technocrats or bureaucrats here in Brussels. It was discussed by governments, by heads of state.
Especially Germany.
It was discussed by 25 governments, 25 prime ministers and heads of states, democratically elected officials who chose this path together, what we should have done for the last 10 years. That is to say, economic and budgetary union, accompanied by monetary union. If we want this task, what you call austerity, to be bearable, if we want people to support this budget, we need to create growth, which will stimulate employment.
Let's talk about growth. Everybody, including Germany, agrees it's urgent. There's a consensus on that. However, there are differences. There are those like Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Draghi who want stimulus by structural reforms, more flexibility on the labour market, more liberalisation. And then there are those who want stimulus to come through what they imply should be public investment. Where do you stand?
It is not as clear-cut as that. I hope the heads of state and government, who will meet soon at the European Council, can discuss all this and create the policy Mario Draghi has talked about, or the initiative which I have proposed, growth for European citizens. There are short-term measures, for example, making better use of the available structural funds, finding better means to expand the workings of the European Investment Bank and how it invests, creating what the European Commission proposed, so-called project bonds, that is to say, loans which have been pooled at European level to invest in infrastructure, in networks for the digital economy, for energy or clean transport. The second component is the single market. There are structural reforms. We have proposed 50 rules or European laws to facilitate mobility, to facilitate investment, to facilitate innovation.
When you think of the single market, you think of harmonisation or a level playing field. But there is competition among European countries. For now, it's not on equal terms. There are huge gaps in salaries with many consequences, notably relocation. There are limits to this single market.
Of course, not everything is equal in the single market, but the path we have laid down is to harmonise, to come together more, to have standards, common rules, and not to prevent competition. Competition is part of life. What I'm working for is competition which is fair and equitable. The single market is the main opportunity for growth.
Ce marché, c'est notre principale chance pour la croissance.
Michel Barnier, vous êtes
Michel Barnier, you are responsible for regulating finance in Europe. It's something on which you've spent a lot of time for 2 years now. Still, even today, financial markets continue to hold governments by the throat. Is there a way out of this?
No financial market, no financial player, no financial product will escape, I stress, effective regulation and the relevant supervision. That's my job. To give transparency, set down rules, governance. Put simply, it is to provide morality where it had been missing for 15 or 20 years, and to get the financial markets to serve the real economy. You are right, we're not there yet. We've made great progress. No market, no person, no product will escape this regulation.
One word about the ratings agencies. They're omnipotent, at least the top 3. You tried to address this but encountered resistance. For example, you didn't want countries which were in crisis to be downgraded, but that wasn't accepted. You also want, I believe, a European public agency, but the idea wasn't passed. How can we regulate rating agencies?
All those involved in financial services and rating agencies are at the forefront. All stakeholders must be prepared to be guided by public regulations, the ratings agencies just like the others. So I have proposed to reduce dependence on the rates in all our laws, to remove any potential conflicts of interest between those who demand rates, those who pay, those who make them. There was too much confusion. We have to have transparent rules. I'm not conducting a war against the agencies. I just think there are too few regulatory bodies. They were at fault in the past, as we've seen, when they noted the US toxic assets, or when they noticed, correctly, banks that went bankrupt a few weeks later.
One last word on the banks. You're working to make them more robust. Is that a guarantee the taxpayer won't have to bail them out, as in recent years?
That is precisely the object of the package, the toolkit that I have prepared. At the moment, it is the subject of recent consultations. I've long thought that prevention is cheaper than repair. And when you are obliged to repair, you have to be prepared for it. Being prepared for that is cheaper than improvising or disorderly bankruptcy, which we ask the taxpayer to pay for. I want the banks to pay for banks when they're in difficulties and not the taxpayers.
Michel Barnier, merci.
Merci à vous.